That night, on a paradise island bordering on hell, a bizarre murder occurred. Jenny, the soon-to-be bride-to-be, was found drowned in the bathtub of her hotel room. The room's doors and windows showed no signs of forced entry. No clues linking the perpetrator were found at the crime scene. The only suspicious detail was a small amount of white crystals clinging to the rim of the bathtub. Additionally, police discovered a cork under the sofa. However, they found no bottles or glasses of wine, seemingly discarded by previous guests and not properly disposed of. Aside from these items, the room contained only the victim's personal belongings: clothes, cosmetics, photo albums, and CDs. Based on the evidence at the scene and the body, police speculated that the perpetrator likely took advantage of the victim's bathing, sneaking into the bathroom and holding her underwater until she drowned. Based on the degree of rigor mortis, police initially estimated that the victim had been dead for at least 7 hours. Before showering, the victim had lit a scented candle. When police arrived at the scene at exactly 8 a.m., the candle was still burning. This type of candle was provided by the hotel and burns for a maximum of 8 hours. This means the victim's time of death was sometime between midnight last night and 1 a.m. this morning. Police investigator Humphrey, through questioning, gathered some information about the victim's stay at the hotel. The person who discovered the body was a male hotel employee. Around 7 a.m. this morning, Jenny's friends noticed she hadn't woken up. They called her, but no one answered, so they asked the male employee to use the key card to open the room door. The body was discovered. The hotel's door lock system is electronic. Therefore, every time a guest swipes their card to enter, a history is recorded. Based on the records, at 9:30 p.m. on the night of the crime, Jenny herself used the card when she returned to her room to rest. Since then, no further card swipes have been recorded. This suggests the killer is most likely someone the victim knew, which is why she proactively opened the door. Jenny wasn't from here. She and her fiancé, Simon, were preparing to hold their wedding here, but he wouldn't arrive for a few more days. Jenny was enjoying her last moments as a single woman with her friends. Unexpectedly, she was murdered. Furthermore, this was her first time at Paradise Island, so she didn't know anyone here. Therefore, it's highly likely the killer is one of the 3 bridesmaids: Jenny's best friend Betty, her childhood friend Ivy, and Simon's sister Sal. Humphrey conducted a focused interrogation of these 3 individuals. As a result, he discovered that all 3 had alibis. On the night of the crime, Betty, the other 2, and Jenny went to an outdoor restaurant for drinks. At 9:30, Jenny went back to her room because she had a low tolerance for alcohol. Betty, Ivy, and Sal continued drinking and chatting until about 10 o'clock. Then they went back to their rooms. They didn't leave their rooms until this morning. The hotel hallway had security cameras. Unfortunately, Jenny's room was in a blind spot of the cameras. Therefore, the police had no way of verifying who had entered her room. However, the movements of Betty, Ivy, and Sal were all recorded by the cameras. Jenny died sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. All 3 of them returned to their rooms after 10 o'clock and did not go out again. Therefore, all 3 had extremely solid alibis. Just as the investigation was at a standstill, Humphrey decided to change his thinking. He began his investigation by investigating the motive for the crime. First, he carefully examined the CD Jenny had left behind. The disc contained a video of a Q&A session between her and the bridesmaids, filmed the day before the crime. In the video, the group even called the groom, Simon, directly. They questioned the couple extensively about their early days together, testing their compatibility. According to the 2 people in the video, at a Halloween party 10 years prior, Jenny, admiring Simon, had deliberately gotten him drunk. After he got drunk, he spent the night with her. Following that, they officially became a couple and spent 10 years together. Humphrey watched the video repeatedly without finding any valuable clues. However, Officer Camille, who later joined the investigation, discovered something suspicious. In the photo album Jenny left behind, there was an engagement photo of Simon and Jenny. Besides the 2 main characters, the members of the bridesmaids were also present in the photo. Everyone else looked cheerful, but Betty was the only one who seemed extremely unhappy. She appeared to be hiding something. Just then, Simon, who had just received news of his fiancé's death, rushed to Paradise Island and provided the police with some information. It turned out that Betty was Simon's ex-girlfriend. They had confirmed their relationship on Valentine's Day 10 years prior, but had broken up by Christmas. Their relationship lasted only 8 months before Simon started dating Jenny. This suggested Betty had a real motive for murdering Jenny. New clues the police found also pointed directly to Betty. They collected her fingerprints on Jenny's doorknob. However, when questioned by Humphrey, Betty remained remarkably calm. She admitted to having dated Simon, but that they had broken up amicably. Furthermore, Jenny had specifically asked for her opinion before deciding to be with Simon. If she hadn't agreed, Jenny wouldn't have been dating Simon. At this point, Betty revealed an old story to Humphrey. 10 Christmases ago, the day she and Simon broke up, her sister suddenly died in a traffic accident. That was the hardest time of her life. Luckily, Ivy, Jenny was always there to comfort and confide in her. Therefore, she was very grateful to Jenny and deeply cherished their friendship. So when Jenny expressed her desire to be with Simon, she wholeheartedly agreed and wished them well. Betty told Humphrey that if she truly cared about Jenny and Simon's relationship, she would have prevented them from dating from the beginning. Why did she wait 10 years to act so cruelly towards Jenny? As for the fingerprints on Jenny's doorknob, they were left there because she had gone to ask Jenny to go swimming that morning when the crime occurred. She closed the door when she left. Betty's explanation left Humphrey deep in thought. At this point, another police officer involved in the case, Myers, also discovered a new clue. The day before the crime, Jenny had withdrawn £6,000 in cash from the bank. The bank's security camera recorded her giving the entire sum to Ivy. A seemingly heated argument ensued between the two. Ivy offered an explanation. It turned out that she had always struggled financially. This trip with Jenny to Paradise Island had completely depleted her credit card limits. After Jenny learned of this, she felt guilty and insisted on paying for all of Ivy's expenses. However, Ivy was very proud and had a strong sense of self-respect. Therefore, they argued. Ultimately, however, Ivy couldn't win the argument and had to accept Jenny's kindness. Ivy's explanation sounded reasonable, but it was only a one-sided account. Clearly, the suspicion of Ivy being a murderer motivated by love cannot be completely ruled out. While Humphrey's mind was increasingly muddled, the police department's forensic lab delivered two new clues. First, tests determined that the white crystals found at the scene were simply termite damage. Second, two voicemail messages on Jenny's phone had been deliberately deleted. The deletions were made on the morning the body was discovered. Clearly, this was not done by the victim herself. In addition, the police extracted the fingerprints of the hotel employee from Jenny's phone. It was highly likely that he was the one who deleted the voicemail messages. Humphrey immediately confronted him. He hastily confessed the reason for deleting the messages. It turned out that the day before the crime, Sal, after getting drunk, had been intimate with him. This was accidentally discovered by Jenny. Sal feared Jenny would tell her brother and husband about this embarrassing incident, so she recorded two voicemail messages begging Jenny to keep it a secret. After Jenny's death, Sal feared her voicemail messages would be leaked, so she asked the waiter to find an opportunity to delete them. He reluctantly agreed to help. As a result, he was so clumsy that he even forgot to wipe away the fingerprints. Although all three bridesmaids had motives for murder, Humphrey felt their motives weren't strong enough. More importantly, if the real killer was one of these three, how did they manage to avoid the cameras and sneak into Jenny's room? And why was there salt inexplicably in the bathtub at the crime scene? Humphrey decided to go to a bar alone for a drink to calm down. As soon as he sat down, he noticed the table in front of him shaking slightly. He grabbed a piece of crumpled paper to steady the table legs. At that moment, a sudden flash of insight struck him. He remembered a clue he had always overlooked: the cork found under the sofa in the room where the crime occurred. This cork wasn't discarded by a guest beforehand, but rather evidence carelessly dropped by the killer. The killer used this cork to cleverly enter the victim's room. Humphrey immediately returned to the police station to review the video of the bridesmaids questioning Simon and Jenny. Finally, he identified the killer and their motive. He then instructed Officer Camille to research the properties of table salt. He gathered everyone together and began to openly expose the real culprit. The perpetrator of this crime was incredibly cunning. He used a small trick to perfectly mislead the police regarding the time of death of the victim. That evil villain was none other than Betty. The scented candle in the bathroom could only burn for 8 hours. However, when the police arrived at the scene at 8 a.m., the candle was still burning. From this, Humphrey concluded that the victim's time of death was between midnight and 1 a.m. But in reality, simply sprinkling a sufficient amount of salt on a candle can extend its burning time. The main component of table salt is sodium chloride. Sodium chloride is non-flammable and has very high melting and boiling points. Sprinkling salt on a candle can effectively minimize the contact between the candle wax and the air, slowing down the burning process. Betty took advantage of this method to extend the candle's burning time by more than 2 hours. This means Jenny had lit the candle and started showering before 10 p.m. on the night of the crime. At this time, 3 of the bridesmaids were drinking at the outdoor restaurant. Betty only needed to find an excuse to leave for a while to complete the murder. Furthermore, Betty had meticulously prepared for this murder plan in advance. On the morning of the crime, Betty deliberately went to Jenny's room to invite her to go swimming. Then, taking advantage of this opportunity, Betty secretly slipped a cork into the lock. This way, she could insert a padlock to prevent the door from being completely locked, while also creating the illusion that the room door was tightly closed. Betty knew Jenny's habits well. She knew Jenny would definitely take a shower before bed, so she waited for the right moment, using the excuse of going to the restroom to temporarily leave the outdoor restaurant and sneak into Jenny's room. After killing Jenny, Jenny, Betty took the salt she had conveniently brought from the restaurant and sprinkled it on the burning candle. She used this method to prolong the candle's burning time, thus misleading the police. The entire murder process only took a few minutes, so it didn't arouse any suspicion from Sal and Ivy. Although Betty was very careful, she still left two loopholes. First, while sprinkling the salt, she was so nervous that she accidentally dropped some salt onto the edge of the bathtub without noticing. Second, when taking the cork out of the lock, she carelessly dropped it on the floor while frantically searching for it. Fearing that delaying too long would arouse suspicion, she hastily locked the door and left the room. Betty thought that even if the police found the dirty button, it wouldn't be a big deal. A dirty button in a hotel room would simply be considered ordinary trash. No one could possibly imagine its true purpose. But Betty never imagined she would run into Humphrey, a man with incredibly sharp investigative skills. Humphrey had his men extract her fingerprints from the cork. As for the motive for the murder, it stemmed from the interrogation game the day before the crime. Simon and Jenny mentioned in the video that at a Halloween party 10 years ago, Jenny got Simon drunk. After getting drunk, they became a couple, but when confronted by the police, Simon claimed that his love for Betty began on Valentine's Day 10 years prior and ended on Christmas that year. Their relationship lasted 8 months. Christmas is December 25th. Halloween is November 1st. This means Simon knew Jenny before breaking up with Betty. Only then did Betty realize she had been deceived by both her boyfriend and best friend. This deception lasted for 10 years. Furthermore, Humphrey uncovered another crucial clue. 10 years prior, Betty's sister had a car accident on Christmas Day because she had rushed to her sister's house to comfort her after a breakup. As a result, she died in the accident. From Betty's perspective, Simon and Jenny not only deceived her, but also indirectly caused her sister's death. After a night of intense internal struggle, she decided to kill Jenny first and then seek revenge on Simon later. However, she was only halfway through her plan when Humphrey discovered her. That was the whole truth. Betty was subsequently arrested by the police. Perhaps Simon will spend the rest of his life regretting his actions. There's a Turkish proverb that says liars need a good memory. Otherwise, if they forget their lies one day, they could get into trouble. Today's case perfectly illustrates this proverb. It seems that sometimes honesty is a way to protect one's life. Today, a bizarre locked room murder occurred on Paradise Island. The victim was Cian, a young woman on vacation. She was shot in the stomach and died in the shared bathroom of a guest house. The person who discovered the body and reported it to the police was the guest house manager, Astor. He recalled that around 8 a.m. that day, while cleaning the guest rooms, he suddenly heard a gunshot coming from the shared bathroom. He rushed to check on the situation. As a result, he saw a figure leaning against the glass door of the bathroom. A pool of fresh blood was visible through the gap in the door. He tried to push the door open, but found it locked from the inside. Because it was a private area, the shared bathroom door of the guest house automatically locked from the inside. Only the person inside could open it. In this emergency, he had to go from the outside to the only bathroom window, intending to break it to get inside and assess the situation. 3 other guests from the guest house also heard the gunshot and rushed to the scene. One of them was the victim's boyfriend, Griff. Because the bathroom window was made of wood, it was impossible for anyone to enter or exit. Astor had to explain what he had just seen to the 3 others. He took a piece of wood, smashed the window, and then climbed through the window into the bathroom. He found Cian dead, shot in the stomach. She was holding a pistol in her hand. Police Chief Humphrey, upon receiving the report, immediately led his 3 subordinates, Myers, Hooper, and Rose, to the scene. Judging from the evidence at the scene, the bathroom where Cian's body was found was a closed room. The weapon that killed her was the pistol she was holding. Only her fingerprints were found on the gun. It seemed she had acted rashly. However, Humphrey noticed her toiletries bag on the bathroom shelf. The shampoo and body wash in the bag had been removed, suggesting she was about to take a shower before her death. Could someone who was preparing to shower just a second before suddenly fire a gun to commit a suicide attempt? But the problem was, from the moment Astor heard the gunshot until he and the others rushed to the bathroom window, less than 2 minutes had passed. Assuming Cian was murdered, how could the killer have disappeared without a trace from the locked room in such a short time? According to Griff's testimony, the pistol she was holding when she died wasn't her personal belongings. If she did something so foolish, where did she get that gun from? Just as Humphrey was beginning to have doubts, Astor provided him with a crucial clue. It turned out that Astor had discovered that the gun used to kill Cian was extremely similar to a gun he was collecting. This gun was legally purchased and registered. He normally kept it in a drawer in his office. While the police were examining the crime scene, Astor specifically went to his office. As a result, he discovered that the gun in the drawer had disappeared. Now it seems that the gun used to kill Cian must have been one of Astor's collection. According to Astor, he had hosted a small outdoor outdoor party for guests the previous night and boasted about his collection of guns in his office. Cyan was also present at the party. Therefore, from Astor's perspective, it wasn't surprising that Cyan stole his gun. Humphrey sensed a hint of panic in Astor's tone, as if he were hiding something. Moreover, Humphrey's intuition told him that Cyan didn't seem like she had done anything foolish. Afterwards, he and Rose proceeded to question the other guests at the guest house as usual. It was the off-season, and Astor's guest house was both dilapidated and small. So besides Astor and the victim Cyan, there were only 3 other guests: Griff, a young graduate student named Leo, and a middle-aged female writer named Perry. When the crime occurred, Griff had just returned from his morning jog. Leo was having breakfast in front of the guest house, and Perry was practicing yoga on the nearby beach. All 3 heard gunshots and ran towards the bathroom. They then encountered Astor, who was preparing to break the bathroom window. Furthermore, Leo and Perry had only checked into the guest house 2 days prior. They had both met Cyan at a party Astor hosted the previous night. Therefore, they were not close to her. If that were the case, Leo and Perry naturally wouldn't have had a motive for murder. Cyan's only acquaintance on the island seemed to be Griff. Therefore, Humphrey and Rose conducted a focused interrogation of him. According to his testimony, his job was a DJ at a bar. Cyan was a university student who had just passed her medical school entrance exams. They had been together for almost 3 years. This time, taking advantage of Cyan's summer break, they went on a trip together. They arrived at Paradise Island a week prior, having stayed on Phuket Island for almost 2 months before that. From Griff's perspective, Cyan was indeed capable of doing something reckless. Because she was pressured by her parents, she reluctantly applied to medical school. She herself had no interest in studying medicine. She had suffered from depression during her preparation period. Recently, as the start of the school year approached, her condition clearly showed signs of relapse. That's why he took her traveling. He wanted to use this to relieve her mental stress. If his testimony was true, then it was indeed possible she had a sudden breakdown while preparing to take a shower and chose to do something reckless. This made Humphrey doubt his initial assessment. Just as Humphrey and Rose finished questioning Griff, Myers and Hooper thoroughly searched Cyan's personal belongings and made a major discovery. They found a small bag of ecstasy pills in her travel suitcase. It seemed this girl, who had just been accepted into university, had developed bad habits. However, when Griff was questioned by the police, he didn't mention this at all. So was he deliberately hiding it, or was he completely unaware of it? With this question in mind, Humphrey confronted Griff, directly questioning why he hadn't told the police about Cyan's ecstasy use. Griff hastily explained that during her exam preparation, due to depression, she had indeed tried ecstasy to alleviate her symptoms. After treatment by a psychologist, she had overcome this bad habit. He was completely unaware of her relapse, which is why he hadn't mentioned it to the police. Furthermore, he was baffled as to where Cyan had obtained the ecstasy pills. He had been responsible for safeguarding all their belongings during their trip, so she couldn't possibly have the money to buy such an expensive drug. The forensic team quickly answered Griff's questions. They had found 2 distinct sets of fingerprints on the ecstasy pill packets. One set belonged to the victim, Cyan, and the other to Astor, who ran a guest house. Faced with questioning from Humphrey and Rose, Astor admitted that he had given Cyan the ecstasy pills. It turned out he also had a habit of using ecstasy. A few days before the crime, due to the effects of the drug and a euphoric state, he had an affair with a female guest in his office. Cyan, who was approaching to inquire about her accommodation, witnessed this. Knowing Astor was married, she seized the opportunity to threaten him, demanding he give her some ecstasy pills. If he refused, she would reveal his infidelity to his wife. Cornered, he accepted her threat. This is why he appeared somewhat panicked during his initial police interrogation. However, he claimed he had no connection to Cyan's death. Humphrey, however, did not immediately rule out his suspicion. Based on the clues gathered so far, Astor not only had a motive for murder, but also more time to commit the crime than others. After finishing their interrogation of Astor and returning to the police station, Myers and Hooper reported to Humphrey the latest lead they had uncovered. While they didn't find any suspicious messages or call history on Cyan's phone, the network's communication history showed that she and Leo had been in frequent contact for the past 2 months. During police questioning, Leo vehemently claimed he knew Cyan from a party the night before the crime. Clearly, he was lying. Humphrey and Rose immediately proceeded to question Leo a second time. Faced with this evidence, he had to confess to his relationship with Cyan. It turned out they had met 2 months earlier on Phuket Island. At that time, Cyan and Griff had argued over a minor issue and separated for a week. During this time, Leo developed feelings for Cyan. They were a couple for a week. Initially, they viewed their relationship as a fleeting one-night stand in a foreign land. Unexpectedly, after parting ways, they missed each other more and more, so they started calling and texting each other frequently. Previously, Leo had considered concealed his relationship with Cian from the police because he was considered a suspect and arrested. This time, his visit to Paradise Island was actually to continue their affair, but when he expressed his feelings, she rejected him and urged him to leave quickly. It was said that Griff was a controlling and vengeful person. Cian worried that if he discovered her affair with Leo, he would commit murder. If Leo's statements were true, then Griff clearly also had a motive for murder. Perhaps he discovered his girlfriend's infidelity early on and killed her to vent his anger. The problem now is, if Cian didn't act rashly, then whoever the killer is, what method did they use to create the locked room? They pondered all day, but couldn't figure out the motive. The next day happened to be Hooper's wedding. Humphrey decided to give everyone a day off to attend the wedding and relax. Unexpectedly, a small incident at the wedding reception awakened Humphrey and helped him grasp the key to the case. At that moment, Myers, the best man, kept giving congratulations. Humphrey was so sleepy listening to it that he wanted to grab a glass of wine from the next table to perk himself up, but because the glass was quite far away, he had to pull the napkin under the glass to bring it closer to him. This seemingly insignificant action led him to consider a detail at the crime scene that had been overlooked. Based on this detail, he deduced the killer's modus operandi. To verify his suspicions, he hastily left the wedding reception and went to a motel. Finally, in the room where Griff and Cian had stayed, he found crucial evidence. He then summoned all those involved to the motel entrance and began to formulate his reasoning. As Humphrey had initially suspected, Cian had been murdered. The killer had used a simple yet incredibly cunning method to create a perfectly sealed room. When Cian's body was discovered, a small bag of toiletries was placed beside her. This bag contained only shampoo and body wash, not a towel. Humphrey had completely overlooked this detail during the initial examination of the crime scene. Just a moment ago, he had found a large towel and a bullet-riddled pillowcase on the bed in the room that Griff and Cian shared. These two items served as crucial evidence for the killer to create the illusion of a locked room. On the day of the crime, the killer first stole the pistol that Astor had kept in the drawer of his office. Then, carrying the gun and a pillow, he went to the door of the shared bathroom at the motel, knocked, and entered before Cian began showering. Finally, he used the pillow to smother Cian's stomach and shot her dead. Because the pillow acted as a silencer, no one in the motel heard the gunshot. After killing her, the killer spread a large towel on the floor. He slipped one corner of the towel through the door crack and out. Then he moved Cian's body onto the towel, maintaining a sitting position. He then placed the gun, which had been cleaned of fingerprints, into her hand. After arranging all of this, the killer took the pillow and left the bathroom, closing the automatic door behind him. Next, the killer only needed to pull a corner of the towel sticking out to open the door, then slowly drag the body sitting on the towel behind the bathroom door, pinning it against it. This way, no one outside could enter through this door. Finally, the killer removed the towel covering the body, creating a perfectly sealed room. The bullet-riddled pillow was then taken back to the room and wrapped in a pillowcase. This would prevent discovery in the short term. Once everything went smoothly, the killer could find a way to replace the pillow. At this point, the killer was Griff. Humphrey had just discovered the bullet-riddled pillow in the room Griff and Cian shared, with a small amount of blood still on it. Leo had heard Cian say that Griff had an extremely strong desire for control and revenge. Cian had already erased all contact history between her and Leo, but Humphrey speculated that Griff had inadvertently discovered his girlfriend's infidelity, which is why he killed her to vent his anger. As for the gunshots that Astor's group heard, they were actually sound effects that Griff had downloaded beforehand. Humphrey noticed a set of gazebos outside the shared bathroom window of the motel. Inside were 7 broadcasting devices and Bluetooth speakers. These were likely used by Astor to play music at outdoor parties. Griff, being a bar DJ, was undoubtedly very familiar with these devices. To create an alibi and make the police believe Cian died as a result of her own reckless actions after killing her, Griff connected his phone to the Bluetooth speakers and set a timer to play music. He then pretended to hear gunshots, rushed back to the bathroom, and discovered the body with Astor's group. In the ensuing chaos, he took his phone and hid it near the speakers, thus fabricating an alibi. After hearing Humphrey's explanation, Griff realized his crime had been exposed. He had no choice but to confess. However, what's completely out of the question is that Griff was completely unaware of his girlfriend's relationship with Leo. He killed her simply because she had just been accepted into university and he was just a bar DJ. The gap in their social status would undoubtedly widen later on. His obsessive control over her gradually destabilized his psyche, ultimately leading him to heartlessly murder his girlfriend. The film ends here. See you in the next video.